Welcome everybody to the final Hop Power Hour of the season. This is Heather Darby with the University of Vermont. And thanks everyone for joining today. We're going to be talking about hop viruses and viroids, a topic that many people have asked us about over the growing season. So we wanted to make sure that we had some information for folks on that, along that vein anyway, as people are heading into the winter or fall trying to figure out how to deal with some of these issues in their hop yard. So as folks know, if you have a question, you can type it into the Q&A box, or you can also just type it into the chat box, and we'll answer those once the presentation is finished. And we'd also definitely take any suggestions for our winter conference. So if you have any speakers that you're interested in hearing from or topics, please make sure that you type those in as well, so that we can hopefully be bringing in information that you folks need. So with that, I'd like to introduce Melanie Ivey, who is with the Ohio State University, and she's a fruit pathologist there. And she has been gracious enough to provide this webinar presentation today. And she's become the owner of hops because apparently they're a fruit. We were just discussing this. So now she gets to work with hops and has been for a couple of years now. And so she'll share the information that she's learned about viruses and viroids in this crop. So Melanie, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you for that introduction. I kind of realized that I didn't put my actual email address up here, but it is ivey.14@osu.edu if you wanted to reach out, if you had any questions after our question session that we don't get to. So I'm just going to basically give you a general overview of hop viruses and viroids. I'm not going to go into any detail about the viruses and the mechanisms, or the viroids and the mechanisms of infection. It's going to be an applied talk where I'll introduce you to the major viruses and viroids, show you what some of the symptoms look like for those, and then talk about, you know, how we can try and manage them or control them using an integrated disease management approach. All right. So there are 4 major viruses that can infect hops that we have here in the US, and the most destructive one is the apple mosaic virus, and then we also have hop mosaic virus, hop latent virus, and American hop latent virus. And the bottom 3 viruses belong to the same family, and they're often together. So you'll have a mixed infection of the 3. And as you'll see when I show you the symptoms, that I'm going to only show you the symptoms for hop mosaic virus, because with hop latent virus and American hop latent virus, they don't really have any detectable symptoms. What you're seeing, if you get a positive result for those 2 viruses, is actually seeing the symptoms of hop mosaic virus. And then there are 2 common viroids associated with hops. We have the hop stunt viroid and the hop stunt latent viroid. And it's the hop stunt viroid that is the most predominant here in the US. And just, you know, when we talk about hop viruses and viroids, you'll often just hear them referred to as viruses, but there is a distinction in them. One is that the viroid is actually just nucleic acid, so it's RNA, and if you see here, I can show you that it's in a circular formation. They're much smaller than your viruses, and they don't have an outer protein coat. So this is important mostly for when we're looking at detection of these. Viroids are very difficult to detect, because when we detect these structures, we're usually detecting something on the outer surface, and there's really no protein coat or any type of encapsulation with the viroid, and so they're very difficult to detect. They're also very small, and like viruses, they're stealth-like in the plant, so they can go, they can spread out and be difficult to detect. And we don't know a lot about how they're transmitted, which also makes them difficult to work with. So that's why you'll often just hear about, there'll be viroids will be included with viruses when you're talking about the two. So overall, the general impact of viruses on hops is that you can have emergence and early growth will be delayed. And so you might have the plant starting to grow and put up their shoots later in the season than if you had a healthy plant. You have overall reduced plant vigor and reduced yield. And with viruses and viroids, it's accumulative. So 1 year you might see some symptoms and you'll have a bit of yield reduction. And the next year you see more symptoms and you have more yield reductions, till eventually you're just not getting a good amount of yield out to benefit all of the expense that you're putting into the crop. For viruses, that can range from anywhere from 50 to 60% over time. And the yield loss really depends on the cultivar, so it's cultivar specific. The one thing about viruses so far is that there's been minimal change to brewing characteristics with the cones. So it has minimal impact on your product itself, other than you'll have reduced yield over time. There hasn't been a lot of research actually on the impact of the brewing characteristics, other than growers noting that if they've had a virus outbreak, they don't see a huge difference in those characteristics. Excuse me. For viroids, the symptoms or the impact is a little bit greater than viruses. So you'll see that you have similar symptoms. Sorry. You'll have emergence and early growth delayed. But you also have stunting. And this stunting is really, really impactful because you basically get very few foliage and you get very minimal cones. And although it's accumulative, you'll see it a lot quicker. So within 1 to 2 years versus maybe 5 or 6 years with the viruses. And again, you have reduced plant vigor, reduced yield. And in the cases of viroids, you also have a decrease in your alpha acid content. So you have a reduction in your brewing characteristics, which obviously is very important to the hop grower and the brewer. In terms of virus symptoms, I'm just going to talk right now about the general symptoms that we notice, and then I'll go into more specifics for each of the various viruses and viroids. So again, the symptoms depend on the virus and also the cultivar. You can see things like yellowing of the leaves, which we refer to as chlorosis, or sometimes you'll hear bleaching as a term used. You can get necrotic or browning ring spots. You can get chlorotic yellow rings. You can have mosaic or mottling, and then speckling, chlorotic speckling, which are these little pinpoints of yellow dots all over the leaf. So for apple mosaic virus, this is the most destructive virus of the ones that we talked about. So the hop latent, hop American latent, and hop mosaic, you don't have as severe symptoms or yield reduction. This is called, what I'm showing you here is this oak leaf pattern. So you get these chlorotic rings, which are really easily seen here on the right-hand side. You get these chlorotic rings, and then what happens is they eventually start coming together so that you get this oak leaf pattern that's shown over here. And these were pictures taken out in the Pacific Northwest. Very classic apple mosaic virus. For the hop mosaic virus, you have these, what we call mottling or speckling. So you can see over here that you have all of this speckling that occurs. It's chlorotic or yellowing or a lime green almost appearance that occurs. You can also see the speckling here. Sometimes this can be confused with insect damage early on. So making sure that you're scouting for insects and also looking for signs of insects on the upper and lower leaves is useful. But otherwise, it's generally caused by a virus. And then to confirm that, you would have to have a diagnostic test done, which I'll talk about as we move forward. So when you have a hot mosaic virus infection, you will probably also have American latent virus and as well as hop latent virus present. So it's a mixed infection, and this is the symptom that you'll see in response to that mixed infection. So the viroid symptoms, they're similar to viruses with a few extra caveats. The first one is that you will see stunting, and that hence, you know, this hop stunt viroid or the hop latent stunt viroid. And for the stunting, it's temperature dependent. So the warmer the temperatures, the more stunting you'll have. So if you have a relatively warm season, then you'll have more stunting than if you have a cooler season. You also get speckling like the hot mosaic virus, except for the speckling is generally along the leaf veins. You'll have reduced lateral branching. And so again, with the stunting and the reduced lateral branching, you have less photosynthetic tissue. And so your plant is just not getting the nutrients that it needs to grow and to produce cones. You will often see these yellow-green leaves at the base of the plant, or again, they have that kind of lime green color to them. Although I find that this isn't consistent with the viroid as much as the speckling along the leaf veins and the stunting. So sometimes you see these, sometimes you don't. And I have a couple plants in our greenhouse with hop stunt viroid, and I rarely see the yellow-green leaves at the base. So alone, this isn't a good symptom for confirming if you have hop stunt viroid. The other thing that happens is you get small and sparse cones, and it's really, I'll show you in the next image, really dramatic how small and sparse the cones are. And again, you just have less photosynthesis occurring, so you have less nutrients that are going into the cone production. And with the viroid, the hop stunt viroid, you know, within 2 to 3 years, you can have 80% loss. We reported it for the first time last year in Ohio, and it was 100% incidence and 100% yield loss. And these are what the symptoms looked like out there. So you can see that you do have some yellowing along at the base of the plant, but when you zoom in and look closer, you can see this very characteristic speckling that's occurring along the veins. And then if you zoom in even closer, you can see that. So you see these blotches or speckling right along the veins, but really the most dramatic symptom is this stunting. So this is the size of the plant, and this is maybe you know, late July that I took this picture. And so there's just really no plant there at this point. Okay, so that's just an overview of what the symptoms look like. You can see that they're very similar and, you know, hard to distinguish. In the end, when we get to management, it won't really matter what the symptoms are, what the virus is that's causing it, because the management practices are pretty much the same whether you have virus or viroid, and whether you have, you know, an apple mosaic virus or a hop mosaic virus. Your management strategies are the same. For transmission and spread, the hard part about these viruses is that they are all transmitted mechanically, and that's through propagation, root grafting, pruning, which would be your leaf removal as well, and crowning. So anything that can cause a mechanical wound and that can carry the virus into that wound. So your pruning tools, your hands, your crowning tools, they can all hold the virus And when the wound is created, the virus can enter into the plant. And as you all know, it's very labor intensive growing hops, and you have a lot of mechanical practices that you're doing throughout the entire season. And so it's very easy to transmit the virus or the viroid from plant to plant just through your general crop production practices. Some of them can also be transmitted by insects, specifically the aphids. And the transmission is non-persistent. So what that means is that the virus or the aphid will probe the plant for feeding, pick up the virus sticks to the stylet of the aphid, and then the aphid moves to the next spot, probes it, and transmits it. So it's very rapid. And this is the reason why we don't really target the insect when we're looking at management, because the transmission is so rapid that it's already transmitted the disease before you even have a chance to get the insecticide on or to have the insecticide work. And so when we talk about management, we're going to be talking mostly about how to manage the mechanical spread of it, as well as the long distance spread, which is via the propagation material or the plant material. So you can spread from yard to yard and state to state or county to county by moving plant material. And just to summarize the transmission and spread, you can see that all of them, the viruses and the viroids, are transmitted mechanically, and that the three mixed infection viruses are transmitted by the aphids. We don't really know if there's an alternative method of transmission for hop stunt viroid. Again, it's very difficult to study viroids, and so looking at whether or not there's an insect vector can be challenging. Okay, so when we focus then on management, the number one strategy is to make sure that you're starting off with clean plant stock. And after that, early detection and a rapid response is necessary. And the early detection will come through scouting. And I'm going to talk about each of these in the coming slides. Sanitation, in order to minimize mechanical transmission once you have the virus present in the field, is very critical. And then of minor importance is the reducing the aphid populations. And this again is just something that you want to do because aphids can also cause damage to the leaves outside of transmitting the virus, but to make sure that you have an insect program or an insect management program in place along with a disease management program. But again, very, very minor relative to all of the other management practices that should be implemented. So if you're not familiar with the Clean Plant Network, it's something that is really critical, especially for hops and the viruses. So you want to start off with clean plant stock. And so what this means is that ideally you would purchase the clean plant stock yourself and plant it. But as you can see down here by the cost is $25 for a shoot, that's not really economically feasible. And so what you hope for is that your propagator is purchasing their stock material from the Clean Plant Stock Network. And in this network, there are 35 varieties that are designated as clean plant stock material. And the process for them to go through from start to finish to have what they consider a clean plant or virus and viroid tested and free of virus and viroid takes anywhere from 12 to 18 months depending on the cultivar. So it is a considerable amount of work. Once they get through the initial screening process and they have a negative result, then they hold those plants for an additional 150 to 180 days before they actually make them available to propagators or growers for retail. The other important part is that you should be purchasing your stock material from known and trusted propagators. I know that sharing rhizomes or plant plugs is popular because of the expense, but it's really not recommended since these viruses can remain latent and not show symptoms for 1 or 2 years. And then what you're doing then is introducing the virus into your production, thinking that they looked clean, but in fact, you know, the virus was latent in there and showing up in a couple of years after that. You can have viruses, you can have testing for viruses at private laboratories, and the main laboratory in the US that does this is Agdia. That's a private laboratory. The universities, each diagnostic clinic may also test. They won't necessarily test the propagating material, but they will test and confirm whether or not you have a virus or a viroid. And here's the link at the bottom to the Clean Plant Network, where you can learn more about the process of coming up with a virus and viroid free material for retail sale. For the Agdia, this is a little bit difficult to see, but this lists the profile of the various viruses and other pathogens that Agdia can test for. And this is I called last year, so maybe the prices have changed a little bit, but the cost of the first sample is $372, and then each additional sample in there is $60, and that does not include shipping. But they will screen for your viruses, the various viruses that are listed here. And then if you look here at this one, the carlavirus group test, again, these are usually all together in a mixed infection, so you can see that that's considered one test. Okay, so you've started your hop yard with what you believe to be, you know, virus and viroid free planting material. So the next step then is to be scouting. And early detection is really critical because, again, you're handling the hop plant so much through the production year that it's very easy to have mechanical transmission. So you want to scout your yards regularly, you know, at least once a week. And I know that depending on the size of your yard, that can, you know, be very labor intensive. You may want to, for those that have larger plantings, you may want to divide your yard up into blocks and, you know, do one block at the beginning of the week and then another in the middle, and so that you're breaking up the time it takes to scout. When you scout, you want to scout in a zigzag or a W pattern that's shown here, where each one of these dots basically represents where you would stop and look at the plant. And so you don't have to inspect every plant, but you do it in a random pattern where you can get the most out of it. So if you have a row, if this is the inside of the row, then you would just go back and forth along the row. One of the problems with hops is that eventually they do get to 18 to 20 feet, so inspecting the top can be difficult. However, it's really important that you inspect the entire plant. And again, those symptoms are very distinctive. So at the top, if you have one of those tools that you can pick leaves off from the top, you know, you can pick the leaf off and bring it down if it looks like it has, you know, some type of virus or viroid symptom, and then you can inspect it more closely and see, well, maybe it's insect damage, or maybe it's just the leaf was broken, and so you're starting just to see natural die off of it. So you want to look at the bottom and top of the leaves, and then the entire cone. And I have these recommendations are not just for viruses and viroids, but these are for things like downy mildew or powdery mildew or other fungal diseases. And then it's always a good idea to note any patterns or flag any plants. So if you have a plant that you suspect is virus or viroid, or any disease for that matter, you can flag it, and then on your next scouting day, you will be able to recognize where that plant was, and then you can also see if the symptoms have moved at all from that center focal point or that main plant. And so that can help too to determine whether or not it's a biotic issue, that such as a virus or viroid. So early detection through scouting. And then the main question that I always get is, should I pull the plant out if it's a virus? So first thing I would say is that you need to confirm that it's a virus, because the symptoms can be due to other causes, abiotic as well as biotic. And so the first thing I would do is confirm that you have the virus present. Then the next thing to do is to assess what type of impact it's currently having in your yard. So remember that plants are often asymptomatic, and so if you decide that you're going to pull the plants and one has a symptom and one doesn't have a symptom, do you pull both, or do you only pull one? And so it's something to consider that, you know, just because you're not seeing the symptoms doesn't mean that they're not all throughout your hop yard. It's also very difficult, as you know, with hops to remove the entire plant. So getting all the rhizomes and the roots and all of the leaders out can be very difficult. But that's really what you would need to do if you decide to rogue. So also that the decline for viruses is slow. So again, assessing the impact it's having, how many years have you seen this? You know, is the amount of yield loss increasing? Those are things that you want to consider. And then the total number of symptomatic plants as well. So again, it really comes down to, you know, what can you afford to remove and what stage are you at with the virus infection. For viroids, once it's confirmed, we recommend that you immediately remove any symptomatic plants from there. Viroids we don't know fully how they're being transmitted. We know it's mechanical. We don't know if there are other means. And we do know though that the loss is very significant once a plant's infected. And so the recommendation is for you to immediately take out the viroid infected plants. In terms of sanitation practices, always work with the healthy plants first. So again, it's always useful to tag or mark an infected plant or symptomatic plant, and then, you know, handle that plant after you've worked with all of the healthy plants first. Wear clean clothing. I mean, again, it's mechanical transmission. So, you know, if you're wearing the same clothes that you wore the day before into the yard, then it's possible that you have the virus on your clothing and it can be transmitted. Use clean tools. So this is free of dirt and plant debris. So if you are using pruners and they have a buildup of dirt and, you know, the plant debris on it, the sap of the plant, that can carry the virus. You want to remove pruning material from the yard immediately. So don't throw it on the ground and just leave it there. It's really important that you get it out of the yard. And again, these are ideal practices. I know that, you know, with the size of the yards and the amount of work that you have to do out there, that it's not going to be easy or inexpensive to do these, but these are the, you know, the best practices to be used. For pruning, you want to use sanitizers if you're using pruners. And then there's possibly some alternative methods, which I'll just talk about at the very end, that could be used. For equipment sanitation, as I mentioned, you want to make sure that your tools are free from dirt or plant debris, because if you're using a sanitizer, the sanitizer will be ineffective if your pruning tools already have dirt on them, because the sanitizer is going to bind to the dirt and the plant debris on your pruners and not be effective on the virus or viroids itself. So Sanitizing between plants is recommended, and there are various products that are available and that have been tested and shown to, reduce virus on the pruning tools from anywhere from 80 to 100%. And so I've listed these here. It's always recommended to use the labeled rate. Remember that the label is the law, even for sanitizers. So just refer to the label. 20% skim milk is very effective, but it can stink in a hot day out there. But basically, it creates a wall on the pruning material so that the virus can't bind to it. There are various ways that you can deliver sanitizers without just having to spray in the field, like spray your pruners or dip your pruners in the field. So there are these things called minnow knives, and so the sanitizer goes in here, and every time you make a cut, a little bit of sanitizer is put onto the blade. Again, you want to make sure the blades are clean and free of dirt. So that's showing you that here. This one is around $200, but you put the sanitizer in this canister, and then it can attach to your belt, and I don't know if you can see it here, but there's a tube that goes up, and so every time you make a cut, it releases the sanitizer. You'll see some growers that they'll have a little makeshift container attached to their belt with a sponge in it, and then they can press the pruner tips into that sponge to get the sanitizer on it. So there are various ways that you can do it that won't cost you $200. In terms of some alternatives, there are a couple of SARE grants that are projects that are being supported by SARE. One is the use of sheep to trim the bottom portions of the binds for your deep pruning. Whether or not the sheep can transmit the virus, I don't think anybody's looked at that. I just thought it was an interesting, perhaps, alternative. And then in terms of getting rid of your crop debris in the fields, flaming is an option. So those are a couple of alternatives that are being looked at for downy mildew, and then for weed removal, and maybe there's some type of impact on getting rid of viruses. But again, those are alternative strategies. So that's all I have. I'm willing to take some questions and hopefully can provide some answers. So.
Great, thank you very much. That was very informative, Melanie. So I think everybody knows the drill right now. If you have questions, if you can type them into the chat box or the Q&A box, either way works. And we're gonna share the quick poll right now. So if you could, I'm gonna launch it here. If you could also answer the quick poll, that would be great. So we're wondering if this webinar has helped you identify hops, and also will you plan on making a change in your scouting or treating of viruses as a result of the webinar today. So please take a few minutes to enter the your answer in the quick poll. So we'll leave that up for a few minutes here, or a few seconds. It looks like we had one question about potato leafhoppers. Do you think or do we know if they vector viruses as well?
Well, as far as I know, there's no evidence that they vector any of the hop viruses. We really don't know the full scope of viruses that are present in a hop plant. Basically, we just do it off of what we see in terms of impact on production and yield and flavor of the cones. So as far as I know, there's no leafhopper that's been identified that can transmit a hops virus. It's the green peach aphid, the Damon aphid, and one more to think of it. So, but there are 3 different aphids that can transmit, but as far as I know, no for the leafhopper. The leafhoppers can cause a lot of damage to the leaves themselves, which often is confused with virus damage. So it's important that that leafhopper scorch can be a real problem, and especially for homeowners, that's the #1 sample that I get into my lab is due to leafhopper damage.
Well, that feels like good news.
Yeah.
Since we have a lot of issues with leafhoppers. So another question, do we know what the extent of virus infection? This says in the Northeast, but I imagine in the Midwest or Central region as well. I don't think we've done any surveying.
No, I think that what I've seen in Ohio in the last 2.5 years, that we're reaching a climax with the amount of virus we're seeing. So as I mentioned, it's accumulative in its impact, and I think we're at a point where, you know, a lot of our Ohio growers are having a lot of troubles now with viruses. And I also know that there was a breakdown in the Clean Plant Network, which I believe has been resolved now. So we saw a bit of a uptake in virus issues in Ohio as well due to that, mostly at the propagator level, though. But I don't think, as far as I know, we haven't done a real survey, but I think that, you know, every yard probably has a little bit of virus present in it, unfortunately.
So if somebody has seeds and they're taken from an infected plant, can the virus or viroid be transmitted through the seed?
That's a great question, and I don't know if there's seed transmission. I don't know if anybody's looked at that, and in fact, I honestly don't know enough about hop growth. I mean, is it generally from seed? I mean, I thought it was mostly rhizomes and plugs, but
it is, yeah. So I think this might be a question if somebody's developing a breeding program or breeding plants.
That's a good question. We know that there are some viruses that are seed-borne. Not a lot of them, actually, but there are some that are seed-borne. And the only way to know if the seed that you have is infected would be to have it tested. And generally, for when they test seed, they do grow outs for it. So they would, you know, start to germinate the seed and then test for it.
I'm gonna unmute myself here. We were getting some weird feedback.
Oh, sorry.
Might have been me. So how easy is it for the apple viruses to travel from apple farms to hop farms? Is there like interspecies spread or not different species? So can you spread from apples to hops? Is it the same virus?
Well, that's another question that I'm not sure that I can answer, only because I've never really had issues with the apple mosaic viruses in the orchards that I've been dealing with. That's something that I'll have to look up and report back on, because that I'm not sure of.
Yeah, it's interesting because in some parts of the US and also here, there are farms that are growing hops and other kind of perennial fruit crops, like
Mhm.
maybe it's grapes or apples. So that is a good question.
Yeah, and especially, cider apple production is really picking up. And, the cider apples are a different beast. So it could be that, something to follow up on. Because I find that the hop growers that in our area are interested more in the cider apple production than the fresh market apple production.
Right. Huh. So I can't remember what you said. Does apple mosaic virus, it's transferred mechanically, or is that one transferred by insects?
It's mechanical.
Okay.
Yeah, they all are mechanical, and then the apple mosaic and the hop stunt,
Mhm.
we don't know if there's an insect vector. Right now, not one hasn't been identified.
Gotcha. Okay. So a follow-up question is, if there's mechanical transmission, how long can the virus or viroid organisms stay viable? So when we say mechanical transmission, is it like plant sap that it's in that's getting kind of moved around, or other plant material? And so
Yeah,
maybe, yeah,
yeah, it's the sap
okay.
basically that is moving it, and the virus can survive for quite a while um, without the host, and
Ooh,
so you know especially if there's a lot of sap material, which is why we recommend making sure that you're wearing clean clothes in there, for instance. And it can also, I didn't have in there, but if you're using your hands and your nails to de-leaf, your hands can also transmit it.
oh wow, I hadn't even thought about that. So definitely more than a day then.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, I can't put a number on it, but um, it's definitely longer than a day.
So
And
do you
and I,
recommend cleaning between each handling
Mhm.
event? So some people are even saying like between each hill.
Yeah, so that's the question, because, and we have this the same in the tomato industry and the grape industry, is when, and for fire blight pruning, ideally you would want to sanitize your tools after every cut, but that's just not feasible. So generally what we say is after every plant. So you would de-leaf, if you're de-leafing, you would de-leaf the 1 liter plant, and then de-leaf the other one, and then do any of your hill, your shoot removal, and then sanitize. So, either if you're saying a hill or a plant, I think of a plant as 2 plants on a hill. Um, the more that you sanitize, the better.
So you can't over sanitize.
Not really, no. No. That one picture that I showed was the students out there, and they, I can't remember. I should have kept track of how many bottles of Lysol they went through during this season. Um, and that wasn't the cheapest product either. So like the cheapest one really is the Clorox or the skim milk. The skim milk, I should have mentioned, it's a dry powder and you mix it with water. Don't go buy, fresh skim milk out of the fridge.
Right. This isn't a virus question, and not sure if you can answer this, but do you have any recommendations for post-harvest application of fungicides before the hops kind of go dormant in the fall? Are folks in Ohio doing anything to that
Yeah.
extent?
Yeah, we usually recommend that you put on your downy and powdery fungicides until the first hard frost, but you can do it on a 2-week 10 to 14 day schedule. So that might just be a couple applications, 2 to 4 applications, depending on the cultivar and in the area, when you get your first hard frost. But definitely we recommend managing powdery and downy mildew post-harvest. Yep.
Great. And I'm not sure if what's registered in Ohio is also registered in Vermont. So we have that information posted on our website. But any product that you're using, of course, we have to make sure that they're labeled in your individual state and labeled for hops and downy mildew, powdery mildew protection. So I don't know if we should name fungicides, or Melanie should, just because I'm not sure if they would be allowable here too. But we have that posted on our website.
Yeah, and if there's anybody from Ohio listening, I have it on my website as well. I think most of them for Vermont and Ohio are similar. It's when you get to New York and
that's true. Yeah.
Washington and California where you have differences. But so I also have it on my site if
okay. Do you have your website off the top of your head? Could type it in the chat box.
The easiest way is just to Google OSU fruit pathology.
Okay, I'll just type that in. Okay, great. We have another question about, does de-leafing with chemicals create an access point for viruses? So, yeah.
Theoretically, yes, it could create an opening. Anything that, causes a minor abrasion is an opening for a virus. I mean, just rubbing the plant itself with your finger can cause an abrasion, but I don't think it's as high of a risk as, the mechanical options like, the pruners or your hands, because of the sap. It's really in the sap that you're moving it along. So I think, yes, it could, but I think the risk is much lower.
Great. All right. Well, are there any more questions out there for Melanie? We really appreciate your time today. And if there's any last questions, please get them typed in. Oh, wait, I got one more here. Are there any antivirals, at least as a protectant, that can be used in hops?
Yeah, I would say no. I mean, there hasn't been a lot of work done on, biocontrols that can induce, the natural immunity within the hop plant, or products for that matter that induce the natural immunity. I mean, they should have natural immunity. I just think that there hasn't been a lot of work done on looking at whether or not there's a product out there that could do that. It's an interesting question, and I think, worth looking more into. But antivirals are tough in any type of crop.
And even in humans.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Somebody sort of asked, how do we do that? How do we figure out what the sort of virus, how much virus we have in yards in the Northeast or even in the central US? I mean, is it possible to actually do a screening? It seems like that it might be really hard that you could definitely miss virus-laden plants through a general screening.
Yeah, so is the question geared more to just the incidence within the states, or is it more actually knowing which viruses is where?
Yeah, well, probably both. I mean, I think folks are interested what viruses probably are where, and then, how
Yeah.
is it 100% of the farms have viruses? You sort of alluded to that a little bit, saying that you may not think that you have something, but likely something is sort of, you know, just waiting to come out of these plants at some point.
Right. So what I've been working with our virologist in grapes, and basically what we do is we go out and collect grape leaves, and then using, you know, metagenomics, so molecular techniques, they can identify the viruses that are present in the grape leaves. And it's just amazing to me how many viruses are, or virus signatures are actually present in grapes. Now, what effect they have, what impact they have, is a different story. So I think it would be more informative if we had, you know, if we just tested for the viruses that we know have impact. And other than, you know, time and money, I think it's doable to do that. And it can be looking for a needle in a haystack, but when you're collecting samples, and if you were, you know, going to send a sample to one of your university's labs or to Agdia, you know, they will recommend that you take the newer leaves. The titer is higher in the sinks and shoots of plants, so either in the roots or the new shoots. So that's where they recommend that you take young leaves and young tissue and send it in, because it can be missed, and that you take a lot of tissue. You know, it's not just one or two leaves. You take a lot of it, a lot of tissue, and then what they do when they get to the lab is they pool it and look for it that way. But testing for viruses is, unless there's an immunoassay, can be very expensive, because you have to use molecular techniques for it. So the cost and labor would be the biggest challenge, I think, to it.
Right.
So for our, I'll just add that for our grape study, you know, it's the grape checkoff funds that pay for that, and it can get, you know, pretty expensive.
Yeah, it is pretty expensive. So what's our best, you know, avenue forward? So we have the Clean Plant Network. We've been trying to get people to buy, you know, plants. I think people have been burned that way because there's a lack of sometimes quality control. And so, and same with people buying rhizomes. Any suggestions of what people should do?
Well, so I think it's really critical to, you know, have a good working relationship with your propagator, the person you're buying the plants from. And, you know, once you have a good relationship with them, then they won't be offended if you ask them, hey, you know, can you just explain to me your propagation practices? You know, what are you doing to make sure that your, you know, your plants are not becoming infected with viruses or downy mildew, for that matter. So it's, I think the best thing is just to have a good working relationship with your propagator. And if you do have a problem, that you go back to your propagator and talk it out with them, because it could be that, you know, the plants that they actually got from the Clean Plant Network were the actual problem, because, you know, it's not a perfect system. So there is, you know, breakdowns that occur. So, you know, the ability to trace back and not necessarily to blame anyone, but to identify practices that were used and then how that can be corrected for future plant, you know, clean plant production.
Well, it seems like the industry has grown really fast, and that's made it hard, I think, probably to keep up.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think what happens too is that, you know, with it, it's actually true with any perennial crop, you know, that they want to save money and share the cost, and so that, you know, they'll exchange rhizomes or plugs. And I really don't recommend that be done. If anything, you know, always be going to a reputable propagator and not sharing, because it's an open system. So even though you may think that you have perfect control within your yard, you know, it's an open system, and an aphid can transmit some of them, for instance, and they are asymptomatic a lot of times. So you may feel like you have a clean plant, but you don't. And I also think it's important to ask your propagator the age of their mother plants, because the older the mother plant, the higher probability that you're going to have a virus in there, just because of the nature of the spread of the viruses. The more you manipulate the plant, the higher risk you have of introducing a virus.
Yeah, that's something I had never thought about before, actually. That's really good advice. I hadn't really thought about that as one of the questions.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Melanie. Any last burning questions from the audience? Otherwise, I think we're going to archive the webinar for folks to view later. And Melanie has supplied her email address, and Susan put up the website as well, so that people can get to your information. And thanks again. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll be seeing you soon sometime.
Yeah, and I will respond to you about the apple mosaic virus from apple to hops, because I'm
Thank you
myself, and then you can post
We'll distribute it to our mail list. Okay, great.
Great, thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. And remember, please send us your requests for speakers at the winter conference or topics. And we'll be seeing you this winter. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.